Welcome back to Fashion here. So today I'm going to be doing exactly what the title says. I'm going to be taking a look at expected points through the first quarter of the season. So if you don't know, this is one of my models I keep track of, and it's basically a stat that measures basically what percentage of points a driver gets based on in the races based on their starting position and how strong their car is. So if a driver ends up with 100% of their expected points, they're doing exactly what the model expects they would be doing. Above 100% means they're either doing a really good job or they might have, a bit of good luck. It is, a bit context dependent. And if they're below 100%, it could mean maybe the driver's underperforming, but it can also mean bad luck as well. A couple other things that I've been, toying around with include things like is a car so easy on its tires, or are they maybe too hard on their tires? Because sometimes you'll have cases like, for example, the 2019 Haas, where they're obviously qualified very, very well, but then were absolutely terrible on their tires. So that's something that you have to take into account as well. So we're going to be taking a look at this, and I will maybe talk about maybe the context behind each of the results. Again, it's not my opinion, it's the result of the model. And this, again, we only have 5 races of data, and that's kind of the bare minimum I use whenever I, like if a driver has less than 5 races, I won't even use their data, for example. But again, this is something that should get better as the season progresses. So we'll be going through from number 20 to number 1 based on percentage. So consequently, as a result, that means we have to start with drivers who haven't scored any points yet this season. Oh, and again, one last point as well that reminds me, this is only looking at points scored in Grand Prix, so it does not take into account points scored in the sprints, for example. So let's see, number 20. I don't think this will be a big surprise to anyone, but number 20 is Liam Lawson. He's been expected to score 11.9 points, and again, hasn't scored any, so that's a 0%er. When you look at the race by race breakdown, again, not a big surprise, but the vast majority of those points would be expected to be scored in those first 2 races when he was driving at Red Bull. And again, even though he started from the pit lane in both races, the model was expecting him to score about 5 points each of those 2 races. And then again, you can see once he switches back to Racing Bulls, again, basically he's expected to score, a point or less in each of the next 3 races. But still, that adds up to a grand total of 11.9. So again, 0%. And again, I realized I forgot this as well, but mechanical DNFs are taken out of the equation, as well as technical did not start. But again, we haven't had any of those yet this year. So that's number 20, Liam Lawson. Number 19 is Fernando Alonso. As you can see with the number 2 bar, there's nothing there. Again, that was a mechanical retirement. Now for Alonso, it's a bit of an, I think, unfortunate one. Again, first race of the season was a really great opportunity for him. Crashes out there. Second race, again, another opportunity, but mechanical issue there. So I think as well, just really unfortunate for him, and for him, for Alonso, the model basically expecting him to score 4.3 points. So again, a negative 4.3, which comes out at, again, of course, 0%. Number 18, Jack Doohan, negative 0.8. Now for Doohan, I don't think he's been fantastic this year. But again, the model, I think for the Alpines, it does kind of underestimate what the Alpines are capable of, and that's something that I think should get better. There are a couple of teams that I think are maybe a little bit too low, and a little bit, some others that I think are a little bit too high. But again, I do think that's something that will kind of get fixed as, races progress. But for Doohan, again, comes out negative 18, or 18th with a negative 0.8. Now, the final driver without any points is, of course, Bortoleto, and given he's driving the worst car, again, his score is only a negative 0.2. So he's only expected basically to have like a 20% chance of scoring a single point from those first 5 races. And again, if you look at the graph, best chance was in Australia, which his teammate capitalized on. But you can see basically the other races, it's basically very, very low chance, just because the car is so slow, which is part of the reason why, there hasn't really been much talk about, the fact that Bortoleto hasn't scored any points. And this is where we start getting into the drivers who have scored points. And number 16 is, unfortunately, Yuki. Unfortunately for him, Yuki Tsunoda. Now for Tsunoda, an 8% is an absolutely apoplectically bad score. Just historically speaking, most drivers in front running teams or even midfield teams, anything below I would say 75% is pretty bad, pretty catastrophic. So again, the fact that Tsunoda through 5 races has an 8% is pretty poor. But again, I don't think this is all on him. First 2 races of the season, absolutely disastrous strategy by Racing Bulls. Took him out of the points from a very, very good position. And then his front wing exploded in China as well. So those 2 races, I think, drove very well. And again, just bad luck there. The next 3 races, again, it's one of those tough ones. His first race in Red Bull, of course, a track where overtaking very difficult, qualified outside the top 10, wasn't able to progress. Fourth race, again, Red Bull's worst race of the 3 that he's driven at Red Bull. And then, so again, I thought, did okay in Bahrain. And then, of course, race 5 in Saudi Arabia, he crashes out on the opening lap. So I do think that this is a score that's much lower than it will end up being by the end of the season, I hope, for Tsunoda's sake. But again, I do think, the context makes a lot more sense. He has only scored 2 points in Grand Prix, and again, 3 points in the sprint. Number 15 is Carlos Sainz. Now for Sainz, this is a bit of a tough one. Again, a bit similar to Tsunoda, a bit of bad luck. Although that being said, he has crashed twice in the opening 5 races, and if he were to continue that rate of crashing, and retiring from races, then again it would be a pretty bad season for Sainz. But as you can see, the 2 races where he's lost the most points compared to expected are those 2 races where he crashed out. Race 1 in Australia, and then race 4 where he started in 8th. You can see, interestingly enough, race 5 he's still below expected, and I do think that's because the Williams is a little bit over rated compared to where I think they actually are. He started 6th, of course, lost a couple of positions, which is why I think the model basically thought he should have finished like maybe a position higher. Nonetheless, for Sainz, again, negative 9.9, which comes out at 33%. So, not a great score for him there. But again, I do have a bit more confidence compared to Tsunoda that I think Sainz should be able to turn this around. And I do think the modeling for the Williams will become a bit more, a bit more representative of the true pace of the car in due time. Now, number 14, again, a bit of a similar situation here is Oliver Bearman, -4 or 60%. For Bearman, only real positives in race 1, or race 2, I should say, were in China, where I believe he finished in 8th. And even the race where he got points, I believe in Japan, finished in 10th place there. It still has him below average, and that's because of the crazy difference between their starting positions and their finishing positions. And again, there's 2 possible reasons for that. One is that their tire management, their tire how they basically how they treat their tires is they treat their tires very, very easily, very, very gently, which means that for tire degradation, they could be very, very gentle on their tires. But one of the downsides of that potentially is that it means that they have a really, really hard time getting the temperature into the tires and getting them ready for qualifying. So again, the qualifying results have really been all over the place for Haas. And again, I do think we need a bit more of a bigger sample size to say, is it just they've had a bit of a bad start in qualifying for both of their 2 drivers, or is this a car that's kind of like the opposite of the 2019 car, where it's bad in qualifying but really good in the races? As a result, it kind of messes up the data a little bit and how the scores are calculated. So for Bearman, I do think it ends up looking a little bit worse than it actually is. Number 13 is Lewis Hamilton's -2.5 or 90%. So for Hamilton, you can see from the graph, the one big negative is that opening race, which again, mostly just a strategic blunder by Ferrari. Stayed out too late, didn't pit for the intermediate tires. So again, that's really the big chunk of his points that's causing him to be below 100%. You can see the race in China where he got disqualified. That race isn't even there. And then, race 3, race 5, it's about what you would expect. And race 4, a little bit better. For Hamilton, I think the qualifying's been the big issue. The races have honestly been fine. But again, a 90% still very, very far below, what we've come to expect for the last, 5 to 6 years, I would say, for Hamilton. Honestly, you can even go back to like the last 10 years. And Hamilton's basically been a net positive, being above 100% pretty much every year. Now, number 12 is Isaac Hadjar, -0.5. So again, not a big difference there. but 91%. So for Hadjar, again, crashed out on the formation lap very first race, and again, that's included in here, even though he didn't start the race because it was his own mistake. Race 2, again, another one where, again, you can really blame that on the Racing Bull strategist, but from race 3, again, positive there, and race 5, positive there as well. So it's, again, so it's been a bit of an uneven start, but again, I think compared to expectations, I do think Hadjar has been pretty good. Now, number 11, this is our, I'd say first, I guess actually third of our front-running teams, but it's actually our championship leader, Oscar Piastri. In terms of points above expected, negative 2.8, which comes out to negative 97%. But when you look at the graph, pretty much all those points are lost in that first race with, of course, that, that spin, that moment in Australia that dropped him from 2nd to 9th. And again, without that, he'd be well over 100%. I generally think overall it's been a really good start to the season for Piastri, but just with this model, that one mistake in Australia really cost him heavily here, which makes sense. When you start second in the best car, you expect it to get 18 points or so, and when you don't do that, it means that you've gotten less points, and especially when you can't just write it off because of a mechanical retirement. Now into the top 10, number 10 is Kimi Antonelli, negative 0.8% or 98%. So for Antonelli, best race, first race in Australia, again, big positive. Worst race was Bahrain when he didn't score any points after starting, I think, 5th, I believe. So, but nonetheless, for Antonelli, being close to 100% as an 18-year-old in a front-running car is still very, very good. And I think I've been, pretty impressed with him overall. Number 9 is Lando Norris. Now, despite the fact that he's been clowned on for, much of the early part of the season, I think in the races he's honestly been pretty good, and the model kind of backs that up. For points above expected, positive 2.4 or 103%. It seems, if you look at this, he's actually been getting worse as the season progresses, with his best positive scores being the first race, and each successive race getting worse and worse, to get to last weekend in Saudi Arabia, where he's in the negatives for the first time this season. I do think qualifying's been a bit of a struggle for Norris. The races, however, I do think have been generally okay. He's had a couple of moments in Bahrain and Saudi Arabia where he's had trouble overtaking other cars on track, but he's generally been able to overcome that eventually and score points. So the fact that last weekend again, I believe first weekend with a big negative, scored relative to what was expected, is a bit of a worrying sign for Norris. Now, number 8, I guess tied. Is he tied? Yeah, tied on percentages with Norris is Pierre Gasly, positive 0.15 or 103%. And again, you can see the big positive score coming from Bahrain, where he scored 6 points. For Alpine, I do think the model underrates them slightly. I do think they're basically classified as a backmarker just because their finishing positions have been so low, on the whole. And again, I do think that they will eventually kind of go back up into the midfield kind of class. And again, that will, push Gasly's score down a little bit. I do think for Gasly, again, unfortunate crash in Bahrain or in Saudi Arabia. And then, of course, the bit of the mistake in Australia, again, were kind of the two big hits against him. And for doing as well, that would, again, if it's upgraded to a midfield class, that would, basically drop Gasly's score and drop Doohan's score as well, which I think would be, appropriate, I would say. Now, for number 7 is Charles Leclerc. I think, he's had a great start to the season. For being in a front-running car, basically, I would say 105% to 110% is a great score. And elite drivers, that's generally where they'll be for most years. So for Leclerc, so far positive for 110%. Really, the only negative for him was Australia, and that was basically just because of strategy mistakes by Ferrari. But the other races, he's either been break even like in Bahrain, or he's been in the positive like in Saudi Arabia or in Japan. So again, I think not really a whole much more to comment. I think he's had a really good start to the season. Number 6 is Max Verstappen, actually. He's positive 15.3 or 123%. Every race has been in the positive so far except for Bahrain. And you can see, like, for example, the race he won in Japan, a lot more points than expected. Now, of course, helped by, the fact that overtaking was so difficult. But again, based on, kind of their average results as a whole, for Red Bulls, I should say, again, wouldn't be expected to get that win necessarily on paper. So again, I think really good start by Verstappen, 123%, excellent as well. Now again, one more front running car, and then we will get into kind of some of the kind of crazy results. And that is George Russell with a positive 13.6, but 125%. So just kind of pipping out Verstappen there for the best kind of percentage score amongst the front running drivers. So for Russell, I think excellent start to the season. Again, he's been in the positive all the first 4 races, and then a slight negative in race 5 in Saudi Arabia, but still, I think a very, very good start to the season, and definitely, I think, maximizing his results. So again, you would think normally the front running drivers would be the ones at the end, but no, when you do this by percentages, there are 4 drivers who are still ahead. And I think the fact that we had 2 pretty anonymous races, 2 races out kind of outside the norm in our first 5 races does kind of skew the stats somewhat. And so for these drivers, all of them either scored big points in either the first race or the second race, and much more than much more than would be expected based on where they started those races. And I think you'll see when we get to go through these. So number 1 is Alex Albon, plus 4.6 or 129%. So you can see first 2 races, Australia, China, big positives there. And then the last 3 races, again, slight negatives for those 3 races. And again, kind of like what I said with science before near the start of the video, I do think Williams' score is a little bit high right now, just because some of the results from the first race, second race are kind of boosting it a little bit higher than I think what we can, generally routinely expect from Williams week in, week out. But that, again, is something that should get fixed out in the next couple of races. But still, I think for Albon, he's done a really good job of capitalizing on those opening opportunities in Australia and China, scored those big points. And again, I think, basically one of the better drivers, in terms of, I do believe he's actually leading the midfield at the moment in terms of points. Now, number 3 is Esteban Ocon, plus 3.9 or 139%. So you can see for Ocon, big massive negative from China, where he finished in 10th, got 10 points there. And again, also positives in Bahrain. So again, you can see kind of that great result in China really boosting his score and overall percentage as a whole. Now, number 2 is Lance Stroll, plus 7.1 or 347%. Now, for Stroll, not a big surprise. You can see the positives are race 1, race 2, again, picked up all his points there. And based on, what Aston has shown or not been able to show, based on how slow they are, again, those are a lot more points than you would normally expect the driver to be able to score based on, where they're starting and kind of, the characteristics of the race as well. So for Stroll, again, I think he's been, he did a good job to, keep the car out of the wall in Australia, for example, kept the car on track, picked up a decent haul of points. I think China got quite lucky with the 3 disqualifications, and the other races, I think he's been quite poor, but still, based on the model, he comes out looking pretty good. But I think likely, as the season progresses, unless he, turns his form around, he's likely going to be riding off this massive positive from the opening couple races. Now, the other driver, again, very similar situation to Stroll, is Nico Hülkenberg, plus 5.6. But when you look at the percentage, it's a whopping positive 1,407% of the points that he was expected to score. And again, looking at the graph, you can see basically pretty much all of that's just the first race with that 7th place result. And then every other race, it's basically, the data is so small, the amount's so small that you can't even see it on the graph. So for Hülkenberg, I think very, very opportunistic, picking up those 6 points in Australia the way he did. Not sure if they're going to be able to score any other points for the rest of the season. We shall see. Again, they look to be thereabouts the same kind of pace that they had last year. And again, if that's the case, then Hülkenberg's pretty much guaranteed to end up with a score at the end of the year that's basically in the positive. So there you go. There is the expected points model results through the opening kind of quarter of the season. I know technically the quarter mark is in Miami, but I thought, it would be interesting to look at now. So again, let me know your thoughts. I think generally it's pretty for front running cars. And again, once we have a couple more races, like I said, with Sainz and Tsunoda, who who I think have had, disproportionately a bit of bad luck, I would say. For the most part, I do think it's, a pretty good indicator of seeing how drivers perform in the races. Again, at this point, pretty small sample size, but, as the season progresses, that data will get stronger and stronger. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves, how those scores evolve as the season progresses. So I'll definitely can do this again at like the midway mark, and we'll do it at the 75% mark as well, just to see how things evolve as the season progresses. So let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Are there any drivers who you think have also maybe not looking at the at the numbers themselves, but is there any driver who you would stand out to you as a driver who's perhaps scored a lot more points than would be expected, or those who've maybe not capitalized on those opportunities? So again, thank you so much for watching, and goodbye.